Hello, welcome everyone. Hi, Gabriele.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you.
Excellent. So, very happy to have you with us. So, I'm Enrico from Avanscoperta. Really happy to have Gabriele Petronella with us this evening. Well, it's evening in Italy, 6:30 right now. Today we are closing our meetup season for the first, 6 months, the sixth month starting today. We do it with one of our latest addition to the team of trainers, Gabriele, who we've met already actually in the past because in his office Bildo, which is where I guess he is now, we used to organize
Yep.
the in-person meetups. Gabriele has a long history as a Scala expert, but today he's here with us to talk about, as you can see below, TypeScript and React, which is also the title of his sold-out workshop we are hosting actually in a few weeks. This edition will be in Italian, but keep an eye on our page because the next one will be in English. So we can't wait for this new experience with the new trainer to start. But today we are here for a live coding meetup with Gabriele. We're gonna refactor an existing app. That's what I read on the description, and I can wait to hear more from him. So before leaving the stage, the digital stage, to Gabriele, I'd like to remind you that you can use the YouTube chat to ask questions throughout the live streaming. We're going to be together for about 45 minutes, 1 hour, so on time for dinner if that's what happens where you are today. And I really encourage you to ask questions throughout because we've seen that even though we are here and it's still mainly digital, but having some kind of conversation is makes it a better and more enriching experience. So enough from me, Gabriele. I will say over to you.
Thank you, Enrico. Okay, hi everybody. I don't see you, but I assume you're there. Please use the comments as much as possible so that we can make this a little bit more interactive. Okay, so I see that, by the way, I see a comment that said it's not going to be in English. By the way, the edition in September is going to be in English. Maybe Enrico, I don't know if you mentioned that. So there will be an edition in English. So just in case you're interested, please ask away. Anyways, so today we're talking about React and TypeScript, of course. And the general question I would like to start from is that, okay, I'm being a good in front-end developer engineering. I'm using these new technologies, sort of new technologies, but come on. In front-end terms, they're very, very old, but in general terms, they're quite new. So React and TypeScript are modern. I'm using them together. Am I done? Have I done my job if I'm just picking the right technologies? So I argue that you're not done. You're on the right way. You're on the right track, but we can do a little bit better. So just a recap. Hi, I picked the silliest picture that I could find. Is incidentally also the picture on the course, but Enrico picked that at that time, so I stuck with it. So I'm Gabriele. Everybody calls me Gabro, so feel free to address me as Gabro. Otherwise, I won't probably turn my head. I am a software engineer. I'm also co-founder of Buildo, which is a consulting company here in Milan. We do a lot of fun stuff with TypeScript, also Scala, as Enrico mentioned, and a bunch of other things, which brings me to the fact that I love programming languages, especially when they have strong types. So Scala is my first love in that sense, and TypeScript is a close second. And I'll be mostly focused on TypeScript and React in the past 3 years, I would say. So I'm trying to share my experience with you today in the course that will follow. So I also like playing basketball. I don't know if basketball likes me. I'm not that good, but I'm told, so that kind of makes sense. So enough talking about me. So this is mostly a live coding meetup. So we're gonna delve into code right away, and so we're gonna do that right now. We're going to back to some slides, and but just to recap, just a few words to recap what we learned from the code. So without further ado, let's take a look at the code. So actually, first, before looking at the code, let's take a look at the app that we're trying to build. So this is the app. This is the final product. So it's realistic. It's not finished, but it's a realistic app in a few senses that we will explore in a second. So the idea here is that we have a list of users. So we're fetching from an API, which we'll see in the code in a few seconds. And we're essentially just putting them in a table. And the table has this table of users has a name, a last name, a status for the user. And if we click on this little icon here, we can see additional piece of information like a date of birth. Suppose that this is like a much longer list of information. But anyways, so we have a date of birth. So we have this like 4 piece of data for the user. Okay, that's pretty simple, but we will see this is already complex enough to make our head spin, and we'll see how it's done. But first, regardless of the fact that you're familiar with React or not, this is pretty much okay. So it takes about an hour, maybe, if you're an expert developer, to bring this together, which is what it took me, because I'm using pre-made stuff for the most part. So even if you're not familiar, if you follow a tutorial in React, you basically land roughly in the same spot as I did. So this is a create React app template. So it's essentially, yeah, please let us know if it's too small. It's way too big for me, but it's important that you read it. But anyways, so this is a create React app. So it's a fairly standard way of starting a React project. And on top of it, I've added a couple of things. So first of all, the UI library is something that we built at Buildo. So it's a design system library based on TypeScript. It's pretty cool, but it's not the topic of today. But if you want to check it out, it's called Bento, the design system. Bento, like the bento box, the Japanese thing. We love that. And so you will see in the UI, in the UI.ts, we're essentially creating these components. I won't delve into the details of why it's this way, but we're essentially exporting the components and then just using them. So don't bother about trying to understand too much about that. It's pretty simple, but again, not the focus of today. So you will see here a few components coming from Bento, such as the stack, which is a layout component, inset, a display, which is the typography, which is the title on top. And then we have this users table. Another thing to look at, which is another little dependency that I've added, which is this use query, which comes from React query. And React query is, I would say, pretty much the de facto general purpose library for querying and executing actions in React as of today. I mean, React is kind of a shape-shifting community and network of libraries, but as of today, this is the library that is mentioned more often whenever talking. Even with the React core team, they mention it as an example a few times. If you're not using something more complex, such as Relay, which is probably used only at Facebook, as far as I know, and probably not true, but it's close to that, or Apollo, which is more used. Those are more architectural heavy kind of technologies, meaning that you probably have some architecture consistency with the backend. But if you're just doing HTTP calls like I'm doing, React query is the simplest thing you can use. Let's quickly see how it's used here. We're using a query. React query requires us to name the query. So we have these users here. And then it just takes a function. So it doesn't even need to be an HTTP call, but it is in this case. So this returns a promise of user. We can see here in the type. And it's implemented as a fetch to localhost, very portable. So I have also a node server running locally, which is not written in TypeScript because I couldn't be bothered to transpile this, but it's like 5 lines of code. Okay, 29 lines of code, and it just serves a static content. So it just serves a static file, which is this users.json, which incidentally is the same data that you see in the app. You can check this. I will share the code after the meetup, but the simplest thing you can think of. Okay, so we're fetching the users, we're displaying it in a table. Let's take a look at the table. So the users table, well, again, don't mind too much about this part, which is the definition of the columns for the UI component. And then we have the data, and we're attaching a few things, such as we have this special column here, which is called status, which is a column of type chip, which is that little badge that you see here in the UI. And that requires you to give a label and a color. So we're saying, okay, the label is the status itself. So it's going to be like active or inactive. I'm going to zoom a little bit. Okay. And the user.status, the color is going to be either red or green, depending on the status. And then again, the info button, when it's clicked, it just sets a user that is focused in that moment. And well, just displays a model with the information like the date of birth. depending on whether a user is focused or not. So again, super simple. Please ask away if you're missing some parts. You prefer me to stop a little bit more on some parts, but again, I want you to understand all the main components here. Okay. So to recap, React Query to query the stuff, custom UI library, not very important, and that's it basically. Okay. The question that I want to ask now is that, is this enough? Enough in terms of, will this be resilient if I tamper with it in a way? I mean, is it good enough for my job?
Okay, it does look like we might have lost Gabriele. This can happen sometimes, so no worries. I'll try and contact him on Slack. Let's see. That's the beauty of doing live events. Never know what's gonna happen. Please bear with us. And we will be back soon. Yeah, now it is confirmed that Gabriele is offline. We will see in a second where he's at. Now, as we are here, I'm sure it's just a matter of reconnecting the machine because he had some issues before as well. I'll repost the link to the workshop that he's doing in 2 weeks in Italian, but then we're planning for an edition in English. So if you want to make sure you grab the tickets for this one, you can join the newsletter. I have to say this was the fastest sold out we've ever experienced with Avanscoperta. 10 tickets went away like in 2 days, which never happens. So if you are interested, make sure you join the waiting list, because the moment we announce the workshop, we are going to release the tickets, and so you'll be the first to know. So as we wait for Gabriele to come back, let's see. Let's do an interview with you as we are here. So how did you come across this meetup? Are you on to meetup, or did you find out on the social media like Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook? I'm really curious to know, because we've been putting a lot of effort into creating new content, even more so in the last 2 years, as we were forced not to have live events anymore. So I'm really curious to know if you found out about this because you are on meetup.com, or you found out on some social media. You can type the comment even if Gabriele is nearly back. I can see him on the thanks Lord. Alucard 90. YouTube suggestion. That's interesting. Found out from LinkedIn. Thanks a lot. It's all really interesting for me and for Avanscoperta. Gabriele, here we are.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. The lights went off in the hall. Can you hear me?
Okay.
So I'm connecting from my phone because apparently the whole block is without any power. Perfect timing.
Exactly. Okay. I see your. Yeah, I would suggest you switch off the camera and we just see the stream. Sorry, the screen. Yeah. If we are, if you are just talking. Sorry, if you are just live coding, it's gonna save some bandwidth. Yeah. I love this when this happens and you have a labyrinth of screens. Thanks everyone for being patient. As you can see,
is it any better? Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, so can you see my code yet? I switched screen. I don't have a second screen anymore, so I can check.
It does look okay. It's maybe a bit.
Rico, maybe you can.
Okay.
A bit.
It was a bit big. Probably we couldn't see
okay,
all the.
big. Okay, cool. How about now?
I can read until info. Yeah, now it's good. Great.
Okay, good. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, okay, start back to from where we started. So, okay, so basically this was the whole app. So I was about to ask, is this good enough, right? So is this application confidently the task of our job, so making it scale in a way. So there are different ways in which we can discover whether an application can scale or an application can scale in many different axes, and React and TypeScript are meant to simplify the scaling of our applications. If you take a look at like TypeScript used to have a tagline which is JavaScript that scales, but they never told in which sense they scales, right? And React is known to build scalable architectures, right? It's one way data flow, separation in components, but again, in which sense? So let's try to take a look at possible axes in which your app can scale and possible factors that can stress your app and make you discover that it doesn't really scale. Okay, the light is back. So eventually we'll be able to go back to my screen, but let's continue for now. So the first one that I would like to mention is time. So time is a powerful axis in the sense that even if you're working in the best possible conditions, so the simplest thing ever, like you're working on your own application and your application isn't even too big, right? You're working alone on the code. In this case, you still have an issue, which is memory is finite. And if I ask you, even if you were the only developer, and even if you work on a single thing for a while, if I ask you a specific piece of code that you haven't touched in 6 months, if you ask you something about that, you're not going to remember all the details, right? So whenever you need to change that, there's still something that needs to have your back, right? And that can be architecture, can be tooling, but we will see techniques. But time isn't your friend in order to keep an eye on everything because it makes you forget things. Similarly, with time, usually the size increases, and the size of an app, I've never seen it decreasing, admittedly, but it's normal that it increases because usually you pack in more features, you do a lot of changes, you make things a little bit better. Sometimes locally you can shrink an app, but in general, like in a sort of a law of physics, they get bigger. Come on, code bases get bigger all the time. So size becomes an issue because now you don't only have a memory issue, you also have a visibility issue because some parts of the app you necessarily don't know how they interplay with others. So again, you have this issue of reliability whenever you need to change something, because if something is too big, it also becomes unpredictable. Another axis, which is interesting, since I've been working on for a couple of years on a project with like over 20 developers on the same code base. It's people, and people can be many different things. So it can be onboarding new people. So you have new people joining your code base. How well is the code base structured when a new person comes in and needs to do stuff? It depends, because sometimes you get very smart people coming on your code base and getting everything wrong. And in that case, it may be that your code base is not good, structurally good enough, or maybe there is not enough tooling to guide people through the right path. Another thing with people is that you may have turnovers on the code base. So you change people on the code base, maybe because people change jobs, or maybe because like this happens to us all the time. Maybe we start an application and then we give it back, we hand it over to a client of ours because their internal team now is managing it, because we're a consulting company. So there, at some point, the original people that wrote the code base are not there anymore. So even if you have perfect memory, even if you have the perfect people doing the code base, then at some point somebody else is going to use them. So again, Is this good enough? My take is that if those people can get productive and do the right thing on that code base, even if they didn't start it, then the code base is pretty good. And finally, our favorite one as developers is the business, aka the requirements. So the requirements change all the time. And the requirements change because of many, many different reasons. I work with startups, I work with big banks and big companies. It doesn't matter. They change because the environment changes, because it wasn't clear at the very beginning. We're clearing the requirement up. So the business pivoted to something else. So you always need to do changes to your code base due to the requirements. So to recap, I think those are reasonable axes to focus on when you want to understand whether your code base is resilient. It needs to be resilient to the passage of time. It needs to be resilient to getting bigger. It needs to be resilient to adding and shifting the people that work on the code base. And it needs to be resilient towards the requirements that are ever changing. So now, as an exercise, let's break stuff. So what we're going to do now is to try to test one of these axes. So let's go back to the axis. I can't test the time. I wrote this between yesterday and today, so because procrastination, but it's very fresh in my mind, the code base. The size isn't that daunting as you saw. And well, the people, it was just me. So, I mean, I couldn't board you, but it wouldn't make a lot of sense. So we're going to try to change the requirements of the app. And so again, how we're going to change the requirements in the most drastic possible way. We're going to change what the API returns. So let's go back to the code. And for this, if you can it, I may try to go back to my screen.
Let's see if we can do the magic.
Okay, I'm back here. Let me try. Sorry, I want to just take a minute here because
yes,
I think it's a little bit better. So stop screen sharing this. Screen share this one. Okay. Okay, Enrico, can you please add it back?
Let's
Okay.
do this.
Nice.
Thanks for the patience, everyone.
Sorry, everyone. Of course, the whole block lost power while I'm giving the first meetup in months. Okay, great. So we're back to the code. And now, so if you see here, if you can spot in the API, we have users and users new. And in the index, we have two routes: users serves users and users new serves users new. So users new has a few changes, but I'm not going to tell you what the changes are. I'm just going to go in the API and switch this to users new. And now let's see what breaks. So suppose this actually happened, right? So sometimes the requirements come in the form of a neatly packed Jira ticket that you can work on. Sometimes the backend team isn't under your control and then deploy a new API on staging and everything breaks. Familiar? Happened to me, at least. Maybe I'm very unlucky, but that happens all the time. My experience that you have some issue in the specification that you didn't really discuss and this changes. So in this case, it's a little bit more drastic, but it's realistic that you face something like this. So let's refresh this. And now it apparently didn't break, but it did something weird. So first one looks good. Jane Doe active. Okay, John Doe is inactive, and Glenda Berry is pending. That's new. We didn't have a pending state before, and it's red, which is confusing because you may mistakenly think it's inactive, right? You probably didn't want to do this. You want to discriminate these three colors, but this pending is new, so we just didn't know what to do with it. Plus, if you open any user, the database is now invalid. Okay, I purposely made this example behind a model or something because if it's trivial enough that you open it and you see it, maybe it's good. Okay, maybe you don't need all the tooling and everything. But if you developed this model 6 months ago, you never open it back, and maybe the only people that open this are users and QA and testing, you're gonna get this information potentially very late. So this did it obviously break, right? This just printed an invalid date here, which is thanks to JavaScript APIs, I guess. It could have been broken in many, many different ways, and we will see this is very accidental. But again, we have a couple of issues. So let's take a look at what actually changed. So if we do a call again, we see that the user's new here is now responding with a first name, a last name, a birthday and a status. So of course, the last one has a status pending, which is new. We didn't really manage it. And birthday seems to be broken. Let's take a look at our code. So let's go in under users table. And we see here that we use date of birth instead of birthday. That's rather arbitrary as a change, but that's what it is. Let's suppose we just run through the backend checks, ask people, and this is correct, right? Now it's birthday. It's not date of birth anymore. Why are we breaking? So we're breaking because we're accessing this date of birth, which is now undefined. And accidentally, when you do new date undefined, it just returns an invalid date, and you print it, then it's invalid. But if we were doing something like this, like date of birth dot, I don't know, dot trim, for instance, now it breaks a lot more significantly. Boom, it just explodes, right? Because now we're accessing an undefined, calling a method on it. So again, it's accidental. It just that I happen to be passing it to an API that's just more forgiving and more dangerous, I would say, in that sense. So let's go back to it. So what do we do now? So the idea here is that you can fix this, right? So you just go here, the domain is date of birth, sorry, no, it's birthday, and you do the whole thing, right? So we have a type that represents the user. We haven't seen this yet, but it's a type that represents the user as we know it. And then you have the API, you would need to change, you would need to manage the fact that you now have a status which is not active, and it's not inactive, but it's also pending, so you would need to do something here. But instead of doing that, let's try to understand what we would like to happen instead. Because if we fix this now, it's going to happen today again, or tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. It's going to happen at some point again. So let's put ourselves in a situation where if this happens, because it may happen, something a little bit more reassuring happens from the developer point of view. You catch the error earlier, and TypeScript maybe is more useful than this. So I want you to make notice that TypeScript didn't complain about anything. According to TypeScript, our domain is still composed of this. User status is active or inactive, and date of birth is not birthday. So two things here. So first one, why is TypeScript not complaining? So the issue, you may know it if you work with TypeScript, but I'm going to repeat myself because I don't know the level of confidence that you have with the language. But the main issue is here. So get user returns a promise of users in the sense that this is an array of users. And that's actually not true. It's not returning any user in this shape, at least. It's returning a user which is different than this one. And nobody's complaining about this. Nobody's checking and nobody's complaining. And why is nobody complaining? The issue is this little JSON here. So JSON returns a promise of any. And the issue with any, well, is that it can be anything and can be used as anything, which is deeply problematic. So I'm not going to delve into the technical details, but any is a really bad type in general. But it was the best type for this before we introduced a better type, which was unknown. But at that point, that ship had sailed, and most of API that TypeScript provides were written as any, which is problematic again. So here we can try to fix this. So if JSON were typed as any, as unknown, we would do this. Unknown is much nicer because unknown, it says, I don't know what this type is. And because you don't know what this type is, you can't do anything with it. That's the idea. And that would be the correct typing for JSON because it can be anything. It can be an array, it can be an object, it can be a number, it can be a Boolean, it can be literally anything because it's a JSON thing. So we don't do this, but we don't get this. So we can do something a little bit better. So we can at least check and validate. So let's write a function that is called validate user, and let's see how helpful GitHub Copilot is. Not very helpful for now. Let's assume the user is unknown. It could be any, but unknown works anyway, and it's a little bit better. And let's say that this returns a promise of user. Actually, just a user. Okay. And we just throw one exception if this is wrong. So this is probably good enough. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna correct the AI that is writing the talk for me. So no, okay, sorry, I'm gonna stop trying to have the AI write code for me and do the right thing. So let's say that we have a first name, a last name, and birthday at this point, date of birth at this point, and a status. And then we check everything. So we say, this is not very important. This is a runtime function that just checks that things look correct. So first name, it should be a string, otherwise it's an invalid first name. Last name, it should be definite. If it's not a string, it's an invalid last name. And then we can check further if type of date of birth is not a string. Well, you guess it. Okay, and then finally, we can do something like active or inactive includes status not. Then we throw an error, okay? Okay, so now we have this function. We just need to call it on multiple users. So we're gonna write validate users since we get an array function. So we have users, which is unknown again, and it's an array of users. And yay, this one works. Okay, sometimes it's useful. So then we're just gonna do validate users. So what happens now? Now it happens that if you run the same code again, and you refresh here, at least you get an error at some point, technically. So why we're not seeing anything, we're gonna get to that. But after a little while, we have invalid date of birth, which is a little more useful and a little more obvious. And technically what you want, you definitely don't want to work with garbage, right? So you may say, yeah, but at least we were showing something before. You can do this kind of reasoning, but it needs to be deliberate. It needs to be on purpose. Here, we're just validating at the very outside of our code base, and then we're just saying, hey, data doesn't match. We can't render that specific part. We can't render anything that involves users because users doesn't match what I expected. I don't want to do any damage, right? So let's fix this for now. So let's say that date of birth is actually birthday, same here, and this also includes pending. Okay, and we need to fix that also in the user interface. We will see a better way of doing this, of course. And this can be also pending. Okay, great. Now this should work. Now we have a meaningful error, meaning that, hey, by the way, in the users table, you shouldn't use date of birth, you should use birthday. Okay. And now, behold, we have our list back and the dates still work. So to recap what we've done, we started validating very early. We're not trusting the input that comes from outside. And if we do that, now we can trust the static type that it's inside. So now we can trust the focus user always has a birthday and it has only these properties here and nothing funny is going on because we checked very, very early on. This is kind of like saying, hey, very, very typical example of this time. You're getting into this concert and you need to have a green pass. Once you're inside the concert, you can be sure that everyone has a green pass if the validation works, right? If everyone gets checked. You don't need to guess anymore at that point. Well, ooh, may I get COVID from this person? Probably not because they have a green pass. Okay, sorry. Stupid example, but I hope it makes a point. So now, there are so many things that are wrong here. So first of all, we saw that we didn't check anything here. Oh, okay, so first of all, this pending red is still wrong. So let's go fix that. Users table, the issue here is that user.status has an else, right? So it's active, it's green, otherwise it's red, which is wrong in most of the times unless this is just active or inactive, right? So as a rule, and this is kind of the only one of the few things that I want you to take home, basically never use if-elses or switches with a default. I want to say that a few times. Don't use if-elses if you can. But what if I have a Boolean? Don't use Booleans. That's a corollary of this rule. But for now, let's bear with me. If you have a finite list of things, never, ever, ever, if you can, at the cost of writing more code, use an else. because the else is what gets you, because everything goes in there whether you want or not. And typically you want to reason about the new cases that gets added to your requirements. So what I would do here is to use a switch without a default. I'm not going to do that, or better, I want to do that quickly without explaining too much, because it's super tedious, because in JavaScript, you need to wrap this into an immediately invoked function expression, which is this horrible monster here, because switch doesn't return anything, it's just a statement. So you need to do the whole thing, and then you return red, and then you do case active, inactive, and sorry, that was green, right, and then you return red, and then you return pending, okay? And these can be great. So now we got this right, okay? But this is, again, it's a pitfall, because in TypeScript, if you forget a case, nobody's complaining, and you need to do explicitly annotating this as a string. So now it understands that you're not returning a string here, so you need to manage pending and do the whole thing again, and now it works. So again, switch is very useful, but you always need to make sure it's expected type matches something. If you take this off, you're back to square one, and it's not very useful. So I'm about to suggest an alternative, which is called TS pattern. TS pattern is a very nice library. So sorry, yarn add TS pattern is a very nice library, which gives us a way of like matching on things that are finite, and has a couple of features that are really, really important in my daily job, at least. So we can import that from TS pattern, has this nifty match function, and we can replace the switch case with a match function. So basically, match is a switch case on steroids. It can do a lot of things. So match, it's going to be, we're going to match on the user status. And then this has a Fluent API, if you're familiar with those. So we have a with, which is the simplest one. When it's active, we're just going to return green. With inactive, we're going to return red. And with pending, we're going to return gray. Thank you for suggesting yellow, Code Hub, but okay. So now we need to kind of run this expression in order to get a value out of it. So you can do run, but that's not very useful. Whoops, what happened? Okay, that's not very useful, because run just explodes if the value is not amongst the ones provided. So if you forget to handle a case, nobody will tell you anything, and this would just explode at runtime. So instead, we're going to, so we have another option, which is otherwise, which requires like, otherwise use yellow. Maybe it makes sense in your use case, but again, this goes in the sense of never use else's, and this is an else, right? It's a catch-all case, which we don't want. There's another one, which is quite fancy and is very, very useful, which is essentially exhaustive. So exhaustive has a nice property, which also checks that you cover all the cases. So status can be user status, which we can rewrite like this, essentially. We can just, let me just do this so it's more useful. Whoops. Okay, so back to this. User status is active, inactive, or pending. And if we forget to handle one of these cases, like let's say we forget pending, you get an error here, and the error kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense, right? You need to develop an eye for it, but if you look at the first line, it says, hey, non-exhaustive error, pending. You're missing pending. And if you forget active, you're missing active or pending. You're missing both, right? So it's quite cool at this point, and it's very, very nice to write as opposed to that horrible switch function. So that's that. So first rule, validate very early at the very boundaries of your system, so you can trust the types inside. Otherwise, you cannot just trust the types inside. And with the match function, and in general, avoiding default cases, which if else's or switch with defaults, you can avoid accidentally bringing in cases that you didn't consider. So we don't have the time to do the same refactor, but we could do the same refactor here in the app. So React Query, I'm going to leave this as an exercise to the user, but React Query has a few things here. You can do is loading, You can check whether there is an error or something like this, like is error. And you could use this to build a UI that just displays loading states, displays the error in case something goes wrong. But we see if we do this, we're basically using Booleans. So you're gonna write code that looks like, okay, if there's an error, then do this. If it's loading, then do that, which is a bunch of if else's essentially, and nobody's complaining if you forget one, like it's happening now. So my suggestion here, you can try this at home, is to use another function from React Query, which is this is a user query, and now you can do something like this. You can match on the status. So you can use match from TS pattern and match on the user query. And you can do something like with status, and then this is going to be success, for instance. And then you have with status, and then you write what happens in case of success. So you can try this. And this is going to, if you do the same trick with exhaustive, you're going to have the same guarantees, but with the status of a query. So you can write a helper on top of it, and you can make sure you're never forgetting a loading state or an error if that's what you wanted to do. Okay, again, time is short, so I'm not going to go into the specific details, but you will find the solution in the code that I'm about to share after the meetup. So I would like to recap and do an example before we close here. So if you structure code this way with two simple rules, validate very early anything that comes from outside your system, and as much as you can, model things in finite, things that are finite, like statuses or possible states of a component. If you model them such as you never have a default state, you're gonna catch a lot of errors that you may have. So let's take a look and let's do an example here. Let me go back here to what it was. So now if we switch back to the other API that we had, so let's switch back to users. Actually, okay, no, forget about it. Okay, let's switch back to users. Now we want to see two things. We want to get the error early, in this case in the console, but if you manage it in React Query, you will also see in the UI. And then we want to have a clear path to the solution, just updating our model, a domain model. So the way it's going to happen, so now we're going to explode. And again, we're going to explode in a few times because React Query tries 3 times a query. So just a second, okay. And we see invalid date of birth. Okay, so date of birth is invalid. So we go in the domain and we change this, and we know the change we need to do is date of birth here. And then we need to do the same thing again in the validation function. So this is going to be date of birth, and this is going to be date of birth. Okay. Now that we change the domain here, we're going to get an error here. No, we're not going to get an error because I left this unchecked. But if we were using birthday here, okay, so this is the actual thing. Whenever we're compiling, now we have basically the list of things that broke because we updated our model. And the idea is that as soon as we fix everything that TypeScript tells us to fix, you can go in the browser and already know that it is working because I fixed everything. So the idea is that you spot the error at runtime. You can't avoid errors at runtime. You can just spot them early. And then you change the domain model, which is the outer part of your system, and everything inside, you can just work in the editor. You have a list of errors from TypeScript and you fix those, and then you're done. This is the workflow that I experience daily. And it's not to brag. It's just because it's true. It is not just a trivial application that works because of some coincidence. This is everything every day. You spot an error, you update the model, and then everything falls from that. Down to the CSS, if you wrote the CSS in TypeScript like I do. Okay? There is one thing that I want to touch before we close. This is horrible to maintain, and nobody does this, okay? So validate user is nothing that you write from scratch. Validate user, it needs to be kept in sync with domain, which is this user, which is horrible. It's already horrible with a single type with 4 fields. Imagine if you have like a real application. So the way you can go about this is using a library which is called IOTS. And I can show you like super speed quick how to use it without commenting it too much. So we're gonna add IOTS. And here, we're gonna use it. And the idea here, instead of defining a type and then defining a validation function, we're gonna define everything at once. So we're gonna export a user that looks like this. Bear with me. So we define a type, and the type has a string as a first name, a string as a last name, and a date of birth, which is a string again, and a status, which is, again, bear with me, this is just learning the API, but active, inactive, and we know there is a pending one. Okay, so this is roughly the same thing that we did here, but now we don't need to define this manually anymore. We can just ask IOTS to do it for us. Again, I'm just showing this to make you aware that this exists. I'm not explaining that now because I'm going way too fast. But now user is, again, the same type that we had before. We just derived it from this, which is already a validation function. So I'm gonna add a quick dependency here, which is a dependency of IOTS, not very important, but it's needed to use a couple of functions here. And instead of doing this, validate user, we're just gonna do validate users here. And we're gonna just use, so again, let's import this. So we can build an array of user and decode the users. So this is the API that we're given. And this returns our results. And then you need to check that the result is actually, let's see this. You need to check that the result is an error or not. Left is lingo for error in this specific case. Otherwise, we can just throw an error. I'm not gonna bother too much about formatting, but you can format this a little bit better. And then, sorry, let's do this. And then you can otherwise return it and you're done. So again, this is just to show a point, which is you don't need to maintain this very further, because now if you change this to, let's fix this. So if we change this to, whoops, I went a little bit too fast. So what's the point? Object is a type unknown, our result. Wait a second. I don't know why this is happening. So let's do what TypeScript programmers do. And let's make this, tenacious. Okay, just for the sake of the example. Okay, never do this. In real code at least. So now, if we get an error, we can essentially introduce an error by doing this. Actually, we're gonna rename it properly so it's fixed everywhere. Whoops. Now we're getting date of birth, so this is going to explode, and we need to save this too. Okay, so we're getting an error now, and the error looks horrible now. It will look horrible in a second because, well, object, because I haven't formatted it. There's a way of formatting, of course, but not enough time. But we're getting an error now. But now to fix it, suppose that you're in this situation, the fix is literally, hey, let me rename this, which is both the validation function and the model. Everything is fixed. So this is automatically renamed with VS Code. I'm saving and I'm done. Okay, so this is the workflow. You just update one thing for real. So we're using IOTS. You can also have your cake and eat it too, because you can now have the validation functions and the model go alongside nicely, and you just need to maintain one thing. Okay, so just to recap what we've seen today. Two things that I want you to bring home. Validate dynamic inputs early, and you can use IOTS for that. There are different libraries. IOTS is my favorite, but you can pick different ones. But just do that. Just do the validation. Do it manually if you need to, but just do it. And whenever possible, if you have finite list of things, don't if else on it, and don't switch with a default. Even if you know it, they're not going to change. Even if it's more convenient, even if it's less code, I don't care about that. Write more code, but make it more maintainable. That's my main thing. That's it. Sorry, I was very, very long. The light went off, everything happened. I hope you got value out of this, and I will be happy to answer any questions now.
Thank you, Gabriele. It was great, and especially thanks for keeping calm and coming back to us with a backup plan. This happens. We've had this with Simon Wardley doing a Wardley mapping live session similar to this, and he kept saying something like, I'm in the middle of nowhere, but I have a huge battery in case everything goes off. It never happened, you know, and after like 5 minutes, everything went off. So that's what happens.
Yeah, I have a branch with the whole solution just in case, but and I'm going to share it with you. But yeah, hopefully.
Do we want to share it now, or I mean, I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone. So
it's currently on my computer. I will put it on my GitHub and share it.
Absolutely. Cool. So if you have any questions, we're gonna stick around for a few minutes. I already copied the link to Gabriele's workshop, which we are doing in September in English. It's here again. Thanks to those of you who already joined the waiting list. You'll be the first to know once we have a date and tickets for this. I would say this is it, really. Folks can find you, Gabriele, on Twitter at Gabro27, right?
Yep, that's my name. Gabro was taken, unfortunately.
On Twitter. And I'll be sending links to the video and to the code that Gabriele showed later on next week, because tomorrow is holiday in Italy, and so we'll take full advantage of it. But we'll be back with some information. And I guess that's it then. Thank you very much, Gabriele.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure, and we'll talk soon. To all the others, we are going to have one last live streaming event on the 22nd of June with Matteo Baglini. We are going to talk about his workshop on Scala, coincidentally.
That's a cool one.
Yeah, Gabriele also knows. I think you did the workshop, didn't you? Or no?
No, I didn't do the workshop. I attended many talks.
Okay.
So
actually, we hosted a few at Buildo.
Yep, he was here once. Yeah, and I can recommend it.
Thanks. That was not planned.
Yeah, no, I didn't know you.
And other than that, we wish you a pleasant end of the week, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.